manufacturers who have been devastated here in Iowa?
The answer is we could do much better than a Trump-led trade deal. This deal, and I think the proponents of it acknowledge, will result in the continuation of the loss of hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs as a result of outsourcing. The heart and soul of our disaster trade agreements, and I'm the guy who voted against NAFTA and against permanent normal trade relations with China, is that we have forced American workers to compete against people in Mexico, in China, elsewhere, who earn starvation wages, $1 or $2 an hour. Second of all, every major environmental organization has said no to this new trade agreement because it does not even have the phrase climate change in it. And given the fact that climate change is right now the greatest threat facing this planet, I will not vote for a trade agreement that does not incorporate very, very strong principles to significantly lower fossil fuel emissions in the world.
But Senator Sanders, to be clear, the AFL-CIO supports this deal. Are you unwilling to compromise?
The AFL-CIO does, the Machinists Union does not, and every environmental organization in this country, including the Sunrise organization, who are supporting my candidacy, opposes it. So I happen to believe, and I hope we will talk about climate change in a moment, if we do not get our act together in terms of climate change, the planet that we're going to be leaving our kids and our children and our grandchildren will be increasingly unlivable and uninhabitable.
We're going to get to climate change, but I'd like to stay on trade. Senator Warren.
Well, they are the same in this issue.
Senator Warren, you support the USMCA. Why is Senator Sanders wrong?
I do. I wasn't here. I haven't been in Congress long enough to have voted against NAFTA, but I led the fight against the trade deal with Asia and the trade deal with Europe because I didn't think it was in the interests of the American people, the American workers, or environmental interests. But we have farmers here in Iowa who are hurting, and they are hurting because of Donald Trump's initiated trade wars. We have workers who are hurting because the agreements that have already been cut really don't have enforcement on workers' rights. This new trade deal is a modest improvement. Senator Sanders himself has said so. It will give some relief to our farmers. It will give some relief to our workers. I believe we accept that relief. We try to help the people who need help, and we get up the next day and fight for a better trade deal. We need a coherent trade policy. We need a policy that actually helps our workers, our farmers. We need them at the table, not just a trade policy written for big international companies. I'm ready to have that fight, but let's help the people who need help.
Thank you. Senator Sanders,
right now.
can you please respond to Senator Warren?
Well, I think that it is not so easy to put together new trade legislation. If this is passed, I think it will set us back a number of years. Senator Warren is right in saying we need to bring the stakeholders to the table. That is the family farmers here in Iowa and in Vermont and around the country. That is the environmental community. That is the workers. Bottom line here is I am sick and tired of trade agreements negotiated by the CEOs of large corporations.
Senator Klobuchar, I'd like to
doors.
bring you in here.
Brianne, I want to hit reality here. I serve on the Agriculture Committee, and I will never forget going to Crawfordsville here in Iowa, and thank you for bringing up Iowa, Brianne, since that is where we are. And I went to this plant, and there was one worker left in that plant. That plant had been shut down because of Donald Trump's trade policies and because of what he had done to those workers with giving secret waivers to oil companies and ruining the renewable fuel standard. That worker brought out a coat rack of uniforms, and he said, "These are my friends. They don't work here anymore." And their names were embroidered on those uniforms. Derek, Mark, Salvador. And that guy started to cry. These are real people hurt by Donald Trump's trade war. So what we should do, and I support the USMCA, I am glad that these improvements were made that are supported by people like Richard Trumka and Sherrod Brown on labor and environment and on pharma, the sweetheart deal, because I think we need a big trading bloc with North America to take on China. And the way you are stronger with China is with your allies.
Mayor Buttigieg, do you support the USMCA, yes or no?
Yes, it has been improved. It is not perfect. But when you sit down with the people who are most impacted, they share just how much harm has been done to them by things like the trade war and just how much we can benefit American consumers and workers and farmers by making sure we have the right kind of labor and enforceability, as Democrats ensured we got in this USMCA. But let's acknowledge why there is such fear and frustration. In my part of the country, in the industrial Midwest, I remember when they came around in the 90s, selling trade deals, telling us, don't worry about your slice of the pie. The pie will get so much bigger that everyone will be better off. And that promise was broken. The part about the pie getting bigger happened. It's just that the part about it getting to most people where I live did not. That is why there is such frustration. The sense that these decisions in boardrooms and in committee rooms in Washington are being made not based on what's best for us, but based on their own game.
Vice President Biden, Senator Sanders has said Donald Trump will, quote, eat your lunch for voting yes on what he calls terrible trade agreements. When it comes to trade, why are you the best candidate to take on President Trump?
There will be no trade agreement signed in my administration without environmentalists and labor at the table. And there will be no trade agreement until we invest more in American workers. We should be putting our money and our effort and our time in preparing American workers to compete in the 21st century on the high-tech side, dealing with all artificial intelligence. We should be focusing on equipping American workers to do that. And by the way, the idea, I don't know that there's any trade agreement that the senator would ever think made any sense, but the problem is that 95% of the customers are out there. So we better figure out how we begin to write the rules of the road, not China.
Senator Sanders.
Joe and I have a fundamental disagreement here, in case you haven't noticed. And that is NAFTA, PNTR with China, other trade agreements were written for one reason alone, and that is to increase the profits of large multinational corporations. And the end result of those two, just PNTR with China, Joe, and NAFTA, cost us some 4 million jobs as part of the race to the bottom. I am sick and tired and will not tolerate, and we will use the power of the federal contracting system. If a corporation in America wants to shut down in Iowa or Vermont or any place else, and then they think they're going to get online for a generous federal contract, they've got another thing going. We need some corporate responsibility here, and we need to protect good-paying jobs in America, not see them go to China, Mexico, Vietnam,
Mr.
and
Vice
other low-wage
President, what's
countries.
your response?
We need corporate responsibility, and I agree with that completely. But we also need to have enforcement mechanisms in the agreements we make, enforceable agreements. That's one of the things that has been improved with the trade agreement with Mexico, and that's what we should be doing in any agreement we have. But let's get back to the basics here. If we don't set the rules of the road by going out to our partners instead of poking our poking our finger in the eye of all our friends and allies, we make up 25% of the world's economy. We got to bring the other 25% of our allies along with us to set the rules of the road so China cannot continue to abuse their power by stealing our intellectual property and doing all the other things using their corporate state system to our significant disadvantage.
Senator Warren.
You know, our problem is not just that we need corporate responsibility. It's been the structure of how these trade deals have been negotiated. The United States has had a strategy for decades, and that strategy has been to have government trade negotiators, a small number, and then surround them with giant multinational corporation lobbyists and corporate executives who whisper in the ears of our negotiators and then get deals cut that are great for the giant multinational corporations, not good for America, not good for American workers, not good for the environment. We need a different approach to trade, and it starts by calling out the corruption of these giant corporations that have cut our trade deals. Everybody wants to get to the American market, and we need to put some standards in place. You want to be able to sell your goods here, then you've got to meet some environmental standards. You've got to meet labor standards. We
I'd like
need
to
a
bring in Mr.
coherent
Steyer
approach.
here. Mr. Steyer, even though farmers and manufacturers here in Iowa and around the country could see some relief from the China deal, they've been crushed by the current administration's trade war. What will you do as president to help them get back on their feet?
Look, on the first day, I would undo Mr. Trump's tariffs. On the first day, I would get rid of his waivers that Senator Klobuchar was referring to oil refiners so not having to use corn-based ethanol. In fact, these trade deals have been exactly what Senator Sanders and Warren have been saying, which is that they've been designed to grow the American GDP for the corporations of America, not for the working people of America, and not to protect the climate. So let me say this. I'm the only person on this stage who says climate's my number one priority. I would not sign this deal because if climate's your number one priority, you can't sign a deal, even if it's marginally better for working people, until climate is also taken into consideration. Look, I've got 4 kids between the ages of 26 and 31. I cannot allow this country to go down the path of climate destruction. Everybody in their generation knows it. Frankly, Mayor Buttigieg, you're their generation. I think you would be standing up more. Look, that's why I'm standing up for it. We cannot put climate on the back seat all the time and say, we're going to sign this one more deal, we're going to do one more thing without putting climate first. That's why it's my number one priority. We can do it in a way that makes us richer, but we have to do it.
Mayor Buttigieg, your response?
Well, that's right. This issue's personal for me. It's why we're going to tackle climate from day one. It's why we've got to make sure that we have better answers than we do today. Now, what I've noticed is pretty much all of us propose that we move on from fossil fuels by the middle of the century, starting with actions that we take right now. The question is, how are we going to make sure any of this actually gets done? Because people have been saying the right things in these debates for literally decades. The other day in Winterset, there was a kid at one of my events, raised his hand, and he pointed out that he expects to be here in his 90s in the year 2100. He will sit in judgment over what we do, not just what we on this stage do. Anyone old enough to vote right now, whether we actually put together the national project it will require to meet our climate goals, to act aggressively, not just rejoining the Paris Climate Accord, that's table stakes, but to actually move on from the fossil-dependent economy we live in today.
But you guys, this is
Let's now turn to an issue that's come up in the last 48 hours. Senator Sanders, CNN reported yesterday that, and Senator Warren confirmed in a statement that in 2018 you told her that you did not believe that a woman could win the election. Why did you say that?
Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't say it. And I don't want to waste a whole lot of time on this because this is what Donald Trump and maybe some of the media want. Anybody knows me, knows that it's incomprehensible that I would think that a woman could not be president of the United States. Go to YouTube today. There's a video of me 30 years ago talking about how a woman could become president of the United States. In 2015, I deferred, in fact, to Senator Warren. There was a movement to draft Senator Warren to run for president. And you know what? I stayed back. Senator Warren decided not to run, and I did run afterwards. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote by 3 million votes. How could anybody in a million years not believe that a woman could become president of the United States? And let me be very clear. If any of the women on this stage or any of the men on this stage win the nomination, I hope that's not the case, I hope it's me. But if they do, I will do everything in my power to make sure that they are elected in order to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of our country.
So Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
I disagreed. Bernie is my friend, and I am not here to try to fight with Bernie. But look, this question about whether or not a woman can be president has been raised, and it's time for us to attack it head on. And I think the best way to talk about who can win is by looking at people's winning record. So, can a woman beat Donald Trump? Look at the men on this stage. Collectively, they have lost 10 elections. The only people on this stage who have won every single election that they've been in are the women, Amy and me. And the only person on this stage who has beaten an incumbent Republican anytime in the past 30 years is me. And here's what I know. The real danger that we face as Democrats is picking a candidate who can't pull our party together or someone who takes for granted big parts of the Democratic constituency. We need a candidate who will excite all parts of the Democratic Party, bring everyone in, and give everyone a Democrat to believe in. That's my plan, and that is why I'm going to win.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you.
Senator Klobuchar, what do you say to
Thank
people
you,
who
Elizabeth.
don't? Senator Klobuchar, what do you say?
I would like to
Senator
point
Klobuchar,
out.
let me finish my question.
okay.
What do you say to people who say?
I thought it was such an open end. I wasn't at the meeting, so I can't comment, but I was going to say.
What do you say to people who say that a woman can't win this election?
I hear that. People have said it. That's why I've addressed it from this stage. I point out that you don't have to be the tallest person in the room. James Madison was 5'4". You don't have to be the skinniest person in the room. You don't have to be the loudest person. You have to be competent. And when you look at the facts, Michigan has a woman governor right now, and she beat a Republican, Gretchen Whitmer. Kansas has a woman governor right now, and she beat Chris Kobach. And her name is, I'm very proud to know her, and her name is Governor Kelly. Thank you. Third, I would add to this, you have to be competent to win, and you have to know what you're doing. And when you look at what I have done, I have won every race, every place, every time. I have won in the reddest of districts. I have won in the suburban areas, in the rural areas. I have brought people with me. That is why I have the most endorsements of current Iowa legislators and former Iowa legislators in this race.
Thank you.
Because I know I bring people with me. And finally, every
Thank you,
single
Senator
person
Klobuchar.
that I have beaten, my Republican opponents, have gotten out of politics for good. And I think that sounds pretty good. I think that sounds pretty good with the guy we have in the White House right now.
Senator Sanders, you can respond.
Well, just to set the record straight, I defeated an incumbent Republican running for Congress,
When?
1990. That's how I won, beat a Republican congressman. Number two, of course,
years
I
ago.
don't think there's any debate up here.
Wasn't it 30 years ago?
I beat an incumbent Republican congressman.
And I said, I was the only one who's beaten an incumbent Republican in 30 years.
Well, 30 years ago was 1990, as a matter of fact. But I don't know that that's the major issue of the day. I think what the major issue of the day is, does anybody in their right mind think that a woman cannot be elected president? That's enough. Nobody believes that. If Hillary Clinton got 3 million votes, more votes than Trump. So who believes that a woman can't win? Of course a woman can win. But the real question is, how do we beat Trump? And the only way we beat Trump is by a campaign of energy and excitement, and a campaign that has by far the largest voter turnout in the history of this country. And I believe that our campaign has the strongest grassroots movement.
Thank
We
you.
have been endorsed by many
Senator
grassroots
Warren,
organizations.
Senator
That's why
Warren,
we
I
win.
want to give you the final word.
So I do think it's the right question, how do we beat Trump? And here's the thing, since Donald Trump was elected, women candidates have outperformed men candidates in competitive races. And in 2018, we took back the House, we took back state houses because of women candidates and women voters. Look, don't deny that the question is there. Back in the 1960s, people asked, could a Catholic win? Back in 2008, people asked if an African American could win. In both times, the Democratic Party stepped up and said yes, got behind their candidate, and we changed America. That's who we are.
Vice President Biden. Vice President Biden, go ahead.
I agree, women can win, and I've been in a campaign for 27 of them this last in 2018, the best group I've ever campaigned for in terms of competence. But the real issue is who can bring the whole party together, it represents all elements of the party, African Americans, brown, black, women, men, gay, straight. The fact of the matter is that I would argue that in terms of endorsements around the country, endorsements wherever we go, I am the one who has the broadest coalition of anyone running up here in this race.
All right, we're going to take a short break now. The CNN Democratic presidential debate live from Drake University. We'll be right back after this.
$29,000. So the average family in America would pay $1,200 a year compared to that family paying $12,000 a year. We save money, comprehensive health care, because we take on comprehensive health care because we're dealing and the administrative nightmare that currently exists in our dysfunctional system.
Vice President Biden, does Senator Sanders owe voters a price tag on his health care plan?
I think we need to be candid with voters. I think we have to tell them what we're going to do and what it's going to cost. And a 4% tax on income over $24,000 doesn't even come close to paying for between 30 and some estimates as high as $40 trillion over 10 years. That's doubling the entire federal budget per year. There's a way to do that. The way to do that is to take Obamacare, reinstate, rebuild it, provide a public option, allow Medicare for those folks who want it, and in fact, make sure that we, in the process, reduce the cost of drug prices, reduce the cost of being able to buy into the, subsidize it further, and make it everybody available to everyone. Here's the deal. That costs a lot of money. That costs $740 billion over 10 years. I lay out how I pay for that.
Senator Sanders?
Well, first of all, what Joe forgets to say is when you leave the current system as it is, what you are talking about are workers paying on average, 20% of their incomes for healthcare. That is insane. You got 500,000 people going bankrupt because they cannot pay their medical bills. We're spending twice as much per capita on healthcare as do the people of any other country. Look, we've talked about healthcare for all in this country for over 100 years. Now is the time to take on the greed and corruption of the healthcare industry, of the drug companies, and finally provide healthcare to all through a Medicare for all single-payer program. It won't be easy, but that is what we have to do.
You can do it
Vice
without
President
that.
Biden.
You can do it without Medicare for all. You can get the same
Abby.
place.
No, you can't.
Senator Klobuchar, your response.
Yeah, Senator Sanders and I have worked together on pharmaceuticals for a long, long time, and we agree on this. But what I don't agree with is that his position on healthcare. This debate isn't real. I was in Vegas the other day, and someone said, don't put your chips on a number on the wheel that isn't even on the wheel. That's the problem. Over 2/3 of the Democrats in the U.S. Senate are not on the bill that you and Senator Warren are on. You have numerous governors that are Democratic that don't support this. You have numerous House members that put Nancy Pelosi in as Speaker. The answer is a nonprofit public option. The answer is the real debate we should be having is how do we make it easier for people to get coverage for addiction and mental health? I have a plan for that. And then finally, what should we do about long-term care, the elephant that doesn't even fit in this room? We need to make it easier for people to get long-term care insurance. We need to make it easier for them to pay for their premiums. My own dad, I know when his long-term care insurance ends. And then we have some savings for him. He's in assisted living. He got married 3 times, whole nother story, so there isn't much there. But then we go to Medicaid, and I've already talked to Catholic Elder Care. They're willing to take him in. Our story is better than so many other families. We have to make it easier for long-term care. It's
Thank
not
you.
just
Thank
for
you, Senator
seniors.
Klobuchar.
It's also for the sandwich generation.
Thank you, Senator
people
Klobuchar.
trying to help their parents.
Senator Warren.
So we need to start with what's happening in America. People are suffering. I'll just pick one. 36 million people last year went to the doctor, got a prescription. This is what they needed to get well, and they couldn't afford to have the prescription filled. They looked at it and said, it's either groceries or this prescription. My approach to this is we've got to get as much help to as many people as quickly as possible. I have worked out a plan where we can do that without raising taxes on middle-class families by one thin dime. What I can do are the things I can do as president on the first day. We can cut the cost of prescription drugs. I'll use the power that's already given to the president to reduce the cost of insulin and EpiPens and HIV/AIDS drugs. Let's get some relief to those families, and I will defend the Affordable Care Act. I've got a plan to expand health care, but let's keep in mind, when we come to a general election, we Democrats may argue among each other about the best way to do health care, but we're going to be up against a Republican incumbent who has cut health care for millions of people and is still trying to do that. I'll take our side of the argument any day.
Thank
We're
you.
going to
Thank you,
beat him
Senator
on
Warren.
this.
Vice President Biden.
The proposal I lay out does in fact limit drug costs. It sets up, it allows all the drug companies it allows you to Medicare to negotiate with drug companies for the price. It sets a system whereby you cannot raise the price of a drug beyond the cost of medical inflation. And by the way, there's mental health parity that I call for in the Obamacare expanded with the Biden option.
Mr. Steyer.
Look, we've had this conversation on this stage so many times. Everybody on this stage believes that affordable health care is a right for every single American. Everybody on this stage knows that Americans are paying twice as much for health care as any other advanced country in the world, and it makes no sense, and the government has to step in. I do happen to agree with Vice President Biden that we should move and develop the Affordable Care Act with a public option. But the real question is this. This is not a new problem. Why do we keep having this conversation? We have a broken government. It has been bought by corporations that include the drug companies, the insurance companies, and the private hospitals.
Yep.
That's what I'm talking about. How do we get back government of, by, and for the people? How do we actually
Thank
break
you.
the corporate stranglehold on our
Thank you.
government so that we
Thank
can
you,
get
Mr.
any
Steyer.
of these things passed?
Thank you, Mr. Steyer. Senator Sanders, your campaign proposals would double federal spending over the next decade, an unprecedented level of spending not seen since World War II. How would you keep your plans from bankrupting the country?
Now, our plan wouldn't bankrupt the country, and in fact, it would much improve the well-being of working-class families and the middle class. Let us be clear what Medicare for All does. It ends all premiums. It ends all co-payments. It ends the absurdity of deductibles. It ends out-of-pocket expenses. It takes on the pharmaceutical industry, which in some cases charges us 10 times more for the same prescription drugs sold abroad as sold here. What we will do through a Medicare for All single-payer program is substantially lower the cost of health care for employers and workers, because we end the $100 billion a year that the healthcare industry makes and the $500 billion a year we spend in the administrative nightmare of dealing with thousands of separate insurance plans. Healthcare is a human right. Every other major country on earth is guaranteeing healthcare for all. The time is long overdue for us to do the same.
Senator Klobuchar.
Again, I think it is much better to build on the Affordable Care Act, and if you want to be practical and progressive at the same time and have a plan and not a pipe dream, you have to show how you're going to pay for it. And I would also note practically that the Affordable Care Act right now is 10 points more popular than the President of the United States. So I think the answer is to build on it. And yes, I think you should show how you're going to pay for things, Bernie. I do. This president is treating people out there like poker chips in one of his bankrupt casinos, the way he is adding to our debt. I am the one person up here who has on her website, in her plan, a plan to actually start taking on the deficit by taking part of that money from that corporate tax cut that they put in there and putting it in a fund to pay back the deficit. And I have shown how I'm going to pay for every single plan. Capital gains tax going to the personal level, getting rid of the oil giveaways, doing something about the hedge fund loophole. You can go through it and you can get the money to pay for things.
Question. Mayor Buttigieg, you're selling your plan as Medicare for all who want it, yet your plan would automatically enroll uninsured Americans into a public option, even if they don't want it, and force them to pay for it. How is that truth in advertising?
Well, it's making sure that there is no such thing as an uninsured American. Look, the individual mandate was an important part of the ACA because the system doesn't work if there are free riders. What I'm offering is a choice. You don't have to be in my plan if there's another plan that you would rather keep. And there's no need to kick Americans off the plans that they want in order to deliver health care for all. And my plan is paid for. Look, our party should no longer hesitate to talk about the issue of the debt and the deficit. Now, we've got a dramatically better track record on it than Republicans do. In my lifetime, it's almost invariably Republican presidents who have added to the deficit, $1 trillion under this president. And it's why everything I've put forward, from Medicare for all who want it, to the historic investments we're going to make in infrastructure, to dealing with climate change, is fully paid for. When it comes to health care, you can do it in 2 moves. Of course, my plan costs $1.5 trillion over a decade. No small sum, but not the 20, 30, 40 that we're hearing about from the others. All I got to do is 2 things. Both of them are common sense. Allow Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices and roll back the Trump corporate tax cuts that went to corporations and the wealthy that didn't even need it.
Senator Warren.
So I started this by talking about 36 million Americans, including Americans with insurance, who just can't even afford to have a prescription filled. We all talk about plans, healthcare plans that we have, and these plans are paid for. The problem is that plans like the mayor's and like the vice president's is that they are an improvement. They are an improvement over where we are right now. But they're a small improvement. And that's why it is that they cost so much less. Because by themselves, they're not going to be enough to cover prescriptions for 36 million people who can't afford to get them filled. What we need to do is make the commitment that we know where the money comes from. We can ask those at the very top, the top 1%, to pay a little more. Those giant corporations like Chevron and Amazon who paid nothing in taxes, we can have them pay. And we can go after the corporate tax cheats. And when we do that, we have enough money to to provide health care for all our people. Yes, we build on the Affordable Care Act, but where we end up is we offer health care to all of our people, and we can offer it at no cost or low cost to all of them.
Mayor Buttigieg.
It's just not true that the plan I'm proposing is small. We got to move past a Washington mentality that suggests that the bigness of plans only consists of how many trillions of dollars they put through the Treasury, that the boldness of a plan only consists of how many Americans it can alienate. This would be a game changer. This would be the biggest thing we've done to American healthcare in a half century. Let's measure the effects of our plans based on what they would do in our everyday lives. And yes, we're taking on cost. On prescription drugs, we'll have an out-of-pocket cap, even if you don't get the subsidies that would make it free, a $250 monthly cap. And here's why it's got to be monthly. You ever been in that situation or known somebody who finds that they've got to defer a procedure or delay filling a prescription to try to have it happen in the right month? Because of when your out-of-pocket cap hits, it makes no sense medically, because most of us don't experience the economy on an annual basis. Our bills don't come in every year, they come in every month. Same with our paychecks, bi-weekly or monthly. That's why we set this up in a way to solve the problem without running up $20, $30, $40 trillion
Senator
bills.
Warren, your response?
Look, the numbers that the mayor's offering just don't add up. The average family in America last year paid $12,000 in some combination of deductibles and co-pays and uncovered expenses and fees. You can't cover that with the kind of money that the mayor is talking about. The way we have to approach this is we've got to build this, and we've got to build the alliances to make this happen. I can bring down the cost of prescription drugs like insulin and take hundreds of millions of dollars out of the system immediately in cost. We can get help to families, but we have to be willing to work together. We can let people experience what healthcare is like when it's you and your doctor, your mental health professional, your nurse practitioner with no insurance company standing in the middle. When
Thank you,
people
Senator
try it
Warren.
and
Warren.
use it,
Senator Klobuchar.
then
Senator Warren, you acknowledged that Medicare for All, that you couldn't get there right away. You got on the bill that said on page 8, which is why I didn't get on it, that you would kick 149 million Americans off their current health insurance. Then, a few months ago, you said, no, you're going to wait a while to get there. And I think that was some acknowledgement that maybe what we're talking about is true. And I don't buy that it's not enough. It is a big, big step to say to people making $100,000 a year that your premiums will be cut in half, which is what the nonprofit public option will do. And if you talk, Mayor Buttigieg, about Medicare and having negotiation, I actually have led that bill for years. I have 34 co-sponsors. As president, I can get it done. That would allow Medicare to finally negotiate and lift the ban that Big Pharma got into law that says they can't negotiate for better prices for our seniors. I will get it done.
Senator Sanders, coming to you now. CNN reached out to Iowa Democratic voters for their most pressing questions. Edward, their most pressing questions. Edward from here in Des Moines writes, Des Moines is an insurance town. The health insurance industry here, if there is Medicare for all, what happens to all the jobs and the livelihoods of the people that live in insurance towns like Des Moines?
We build into our Medicare for All program a transition fund of many, many billions of dollars that will provide for up to 5 years income and health care and job training for those people. But here is the issue. Tom Steyer made the point a moment ago. We are now spending twice as much per person on health care as do the people of any other country. That is insane. In some cases, 10 times more for prescription drugs. Why is that? Why is that? And the answer is the greed and corruption of the drug companies and the insurance companies. And if we want to do what every other major country on earth does, and guarantee people health care is a human right, not a privilege. You know what we have to do? We are finally going to have to stand up to the health care industry and end hundreds of billions of dollars of waste and profiteering.
Mr. Steyer.
I just want to emphasize what Senator Sanders said. This is not a complicated problem. Between what Senator Warren and Senator Sanders said, it's clear. There are two problems. We're spending way too much because corporations own the system, and we're not negotiating against those corporations. And we've given tax cuts to the richest Americans and the biggest corporations for decades. That's all this is. We have corporations who are having their way with the American people, and people are suffering. Senator Warren is right. This is cruelty for money. In order to break this, we're going to have to break the corporate stranglehold and solve both the tax and the negotiating problem. That's why I'm for term limits. We need to redo Washington, D.C.
Thank
and
you.
actually
Thank
take
you,
back
Mr.
the
Steyer.
government from the corporations
Thank
who
you,
bought
Mr.
it.
Steyer. Vice President Biden?
I would argue that the biggest breakthrough in recent time was us being able to do in our administration what five Democratic presidents couldn't get done, and that is pass Obamacare. It was a big deal. Secondly, I would argue that the way you control drug prices is you limit what they can charge for those prices. You don't have to pay the price, limit what they can charge. If in fact they charge more than we set the price for, people can import from abroad, assuming that it is safe. We, in fact, it's only yellow, okay? And we can, in fact, do all of this and still provide people the option to stay, the roughly 150 to 160 million Americans who like the negotiated plan they have with their employers. If they don't like it or the employer gets rid of it, they can buy into a Medicare plan in the Biden plan.
Let's talk a little bit more about prescription drugs right now. Prescription drug prices in 2018, Americans spent $335 billion on prescription drugs alone. That's about $60 billion more than they paid a decade ago. Senator Warren, you've called for the creation of a government-run drug manufacturer that would step in if there is a drug shortage or a price spike. Why does it make sense for the government to manufacture drugs, especially when public trust in government is near historic lows?
So let's do this both ways. What I also have said is I'm just going to use the power that is available, and I will do what a president can do all by herself on the very first day, and that is lower the prices of certain prescription drugs. I will lower the price of insulin. I will lower the price of